In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. So today I am bringing you a review of The Last Man on Earth. This is a movie that came out in 1964. It's based on the book I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, which has since been adapted into The Omega Man with Charlton Heston, I Am Legend with Will Smith, and more or less inspired the movie I Am Omega. I don't think gives the book credit, but it's very clearly the same story. And I've actually done a review on that one. It's the second review I ever did on this channel, so please check that out. This movie stars possibly my all-time favorite actor, neck and neck with Christopher Lee, which is Vincent Price. I could talk for hours on end about Vincent Price because I love him and all of his movies. I already love it. It's Vincent Price. It's about him. He was a scientist, a medical researcher guy. They don't really get into the specifics of what kind of scientific work he does, I don't think. But he's a scientist, and this plague of vampirism has wiped out humanity, so that as far as he knows, he is the last living person on Earth. And he will just go through his days, waking up in the morning, making sure he's stocked in things, going out, killing vampires, coming back before it gets dark, barricading himself in, and hearing them battering on the outside trying to get in. The vampires in this movie are very much a prototype for the zombies, or as they would have been called, the ghouls in Night of the Living Dead. These vampires are proto-zombies. The plot of the movie is basically him trying to survive physically in this world that's been completely swept by vampirism, and trying to survive mentally living in isolation, and he is having a pretty tough time of all of those things. Soundtrack to this movie is great. I couldn't tell you a distinctive theme to this, but it's, you know, more classic melodramatic horror music, but this doesn't feel quite as, I suppose, cheesy as some. It genuinely feels sort of dark and somber. There's a part where he goes to his wife's grave, and there's this really, really beautiful melancholic violin in the background, which I liked, and shortly after that, a scene where he's fighting off these vampires, and we get this huge choir in the background, which just makes it sound a lot more epic. So music in this, while not super memorable, I couldn't tell you any kind of distinctive theme that the movie has. It's still really fantastic music. Visually, while the print that I'm watching is not in great quality, I bet there's a nice restored version somewhere. It's not super stylized or artsy in the way it's filmed, but it looks really good. It's very shadowy, it's very isolated and bleak. There are a lot of great settings that show you what sort of happened to the world as it's been abandoned and started to decay. So visually, the movie is great. The acting in this movie, at least for a while, we also have the vampires, obviously, and some flashbacks and stuff, but most of the acting that we get in this movie is Vincent Price. And Vincent Price is Vincent Price, and I don't know what else you want. This is not really a hammy Vincent Price thing. He's not doing his big, melodramatic, campy villain thing, which is my favorite Vincent Price, but he does a great job of playing this man who's tortured and broken by the state of the world. And one of my favorite scenes for this is where he is watching old home movies of his life before everything fell apart, and as he's flipping through the images, he starts to laugh, and the laughing gets more and more intense, and then he just it sort of gradually turns into this horrible sobbing, and it's great. It's really great. It's a little over the top, but that kind of comes with the territory if you're Vincent Price, and I don't care. That scene was great. Him in general is great. And then one of his friends who has become a vampire, and the vampires in this are not quite like zombies. They are, in that it's sort of this plague that's spread, and they really are these mindless hordes, but they aren't mute. They can talk. There's one of his friends, I think his name was Ben, who every night comes to try to break into his house, and he will talk to him, and he'll just go. Vincent Price's character's name is Robert Morgan, by the way. So his undead friend Ben will just start going, Morgan, Morgan, I'm breaking into your house again, Morgan. I am coming for you, Morgan. I have just destroyed your car, Morgan. Morgan. I know that for Vincent's character, hearing his friend who's now dead and become this creature, hearing him come and sort of taunt him every night as he tries to break into his house and kill him has to be torture, but that voice is hilarious. I cannot get over just the Morgan thing. It's so funny to me. The little sort of goofy campy aspects of the movie, because it is a low budget horror movie. This is something put out by American International Pictures probably around the same time. A bunch of the really fun, trashy Roger Corman movies would have been coming out. This movie takes itself pretty seriously, and it gets really dark and really bleak and really sad. So acting can be on the campy side. Vincent does rein it in for the most part, but he's still Vincent Price, which is what I love about him. And then you've got his friend just going Morgan over and over and over, and while it does kind of kill some of the dark mood of the movie, I didn't care because it just added to the entertainment value for me. So acting was all good. There's also some acting in flashbacks and stuff. Some stuff I'll get to in a little bit, but all of the acting in this movie was really solid. That said, I love Vincent Price. A good portion of the early part of the movie, since it is just Vincent Price by himself, there is a voiceover of him talking about what he's thinking as things are happening. And while I love Vincent's voice and I love the dialogue that we hear there, I am curious as to how that scene would have worked had they just thrown us in with no clear explanation of what had happened, just seeing him go about his day and be like, ooh, what's happening? Where are all the people? Why are there vampires? Why is there garlic on his door? I'll get to that in a minute, but if they just thrown us in the movie without any clear explanation of what's happening, and then when it starts to go into the flashback section, just sort of gradually realizing what's happening in the world, that could have been cool, but I still just enjoy the sound of Vincent Price's voice, so the narration didn't bother me. I just am curious as to if the movie would have worked without it. Acting is great. Story is phenomenal. The whole idea of this disease is very creepy and horribly relevant at this point. There's literally a part where in the flashback section, they're at somebody's birthday party and they've just discovered this disease that's going on in Europe. It's not in the US yet, but they're flipping through this newspaper and they're just like, so what do you think? Do you think this disease is carried on the air? And one of them is just like, it's actually Vincent's, I think it's Vincent's character, but he's just like, I just can't accept the idea of universal disease. And as soon as I heard that, I was just like, yikes. Because I'm not going to go into that any further, but just sort of thinking about the current situation and then thinking about movies like this is disturbing. I'll get into more of it in the spoilers, but a lot of people die, obviously, and if you don't want to see cute animals, fur babies of any kind, get hurt or die, and if you don't want to see babies get hurt or die, you might not want to watch this. It's not gory or graphic or anything. This is still fairly tame by modern standards 60s horror, but it's still very bleak and sad, and if you don't want to see stuff like that, don't watch this. You have been warned. So the actual story, the way it depicts this plague leading up to where we are now, where he's isolated him by himself and just having to go day to day fighting vampires, is cool. And I liked that they weren't just, you know, what would become ghouls or zombies by another name. They really are vampires. Morgan will get garlic and crucifixes and mirrors and put those on his doors and use those to fend off vampires. Yeah, and he'll kill them by staking them and then burning the bodies. On the one hand, I don't think burning bodies is the best way to get rid of a disease that's carried on the air. And, you know, to be honest, I would kind of expect sort of a Return of the Living Dead situation to happen where it just creates some kind of acid rain and creates more vampires. But, of course, in folklore, you do want to burn the body to prevent them from coming back. So there's kind of this weird intersection of science and superstition. On the one hand, I found it confusing because they are being called vampires because they're people who have died because of this infection and then come back. Yet there is no blood drinking in this movie, I don't think. There's one instance maybe of someone getting their neck bitten, but other than that, nothing. So I'm curious, does the infection still just carry on the wind, or does it need to be transmitted by a bite? So I don't know. And then you've got all this sciencey stuff, and yet then the vampires are repelled by garlic and crucifixes, and yeah, they die when you drive a wooden stake through their heart, but who doesn't? Unless you're a zombie, in which case, aim for the head, but that came later. I'm rambling. Anyway, the whole mythos here is kind of confusing. I don't know how these vampires work, but I still enjoyed seeing a vampire apocalypse, because that's awesome. Apocalypse is bleak, vampires are awesome, and sort of the isolation that happens and sort of Vincent's breakdown is really, really well done. So there are some very major turning points in the plot, but those are spoilers. So overall, I would just say this is a masterpiece. If you were a fan of vampire movies, apocalypse films, of zombie movies, if you're a fan of Vincent Price, if you're a fan of dark, bleak, black and white vintage horror, this movie is 100% for you. I think anyone who's into horror needs to see this because it's a little campy, a little low budget, but very well made. So that is the spoiler-free section of my review of The Last Man on Earth. Here are the spoilers. So in the flashbacks, we see, again, the birthday party, and then we see gradually Vincent and his wife, their child starts to go blind, which is one of the first symptoms of the virus before you die. And there's this really, really sort of heartbreaking scene where he has to go out to work because they're trying to work on a cure for this disease in the lab, and he's told his wife not to get a doctor for the girl because they're not going to cure her. They've been dumping people who have been infected into these big pits and just burning all of them. So she freaks out while he's gone and calls the doctor, and she dies and gets thrown into the pit, and he tries to go after her and to get her, but nothing happens. And the guy who's tossing the bodies into the pit, when Vincent's like, no, you can't do this, that's my daughter, he's like, my daughter's in there too. We're all in this, dude. That scene was dark and harrowing, and then after we get out of the flashback sequence, there's possibly the saddest part of the whole movie, which is saying something because the whole movie's really sad. While Vincent's going about his daily business, he sees a dog, and the dog runs away from him at first naturally, so he goes after it and he's like, oh my god, I have to find this dog. If I am gonna have a companion in this world, this dog is beautiful and wonderful, and I need it in my life. So he goes and gets this dog and cleans it up and brings it back to his house, and it's all very heartwarming and sweet and adorable. And then he takes a test of the dog's blood, and it has the infection, and he just starts laughing, and he's about to go into crying again, and then it just cuts to the next shot, and there's this blanket over this little body next to the pit with a little stake through it, and it's so sad. I feel so bad for the dog. And then shortly after that, he's going about his business and he sees a woman, and it's not a vampire, because this is daylight, and she's walking around, and he runs after her and she runs away, and he's trying to say, no, I'm not going to hurt you, please come with me, and he takes her back to his house and fixes her some coffee. Then there's a scene where he is shoving garlic in her face to test it, and she starts coughing and is like, no, and he's like, you are infected, you're going to be one of them soon, I'm going to have to kill you. And she tells him, no, I'm not infected, I have been extremely sensitive all my life, and first you run at me and you grab me and drag me here and you scream at me, and now you're shoving garlic in my face and it's upsetting my body, so stop. So he does, and then she reveals that she has in fact actually been infected, but she has this cure that she's got, this stuff she injects into her arm that keeps the virus from multiplying, keeps it isolated, so she's sort of a half vampire, if you will. We also sort of find out why Vincent isn't dead by this point, and apparently on a trip when he was a kid to, like, I believe it was South America, he was bitten by a vampire bat. Apparently maybe it had already been exposed to the virus or some sort of beyond science occult vampire-y stuff, but his immune system had already sort of worked through the virus in his blood and created an immunity. And this is all just speculation on his part. So she's created a way to sort of contain it slightly, and then she says, you know, we have created this, and he just freaks out and he's just like, we? What do you mean we? I thought I was alone in the world. What do you mean there's more of you? We find out that she's actually been sent by a bunch of other people who are sort of containing the vampire virus through this injection in order to spy on him, basically, because he has sort of worked under the assumption that everyone else is a vampire. So he's killed a lot of legitimate vampires, but he's killed a lot of these half vampire people too. That's why she ran away from him, because he is basically, while he sees himself as the hero of the story, he is, through this sort of assumption that everyone else in the world is a monster, become the monster of the story. And it's a really awesome sort of transformation of genuine, well-meaning human into monster via this horrible thing that's happened to him. And meanwhile, she either falls asleep or passes out or something, and he does a blood transfusion with her to try to see if his blood will create an immunity. And it does. It works. He tries the garlic and he tries the mirror, and they have no effect on her, so she is cured. But then Ben, the guy who says Morgan all the time, figures out a way to break into the house and winds up biting her on the neck, which doesn't do anything because she's been basically vaccinated. She has an immunity to this disease. He wants to help all of the others, but they're after him to kill him because he's been murdering a bunch of them for all this time, which is why the original story was called I Am Legend. He is this legendary, infamous, horrible tyrant in the eyes of these people trying to survive, because he just goes around killing them. That's why the story was originally called I'm Legend. The vampires break into the house, and then this huge squad of other survivors, half vampires, come in and start killing all of them and trying to get at Morgan, at Vincent Price's character, and he just runs for it, and there's a big chase scene, which is not all that exciting. The chase leads them to this church, and he is up on the altar with this huge cross behind him, and he just goes on this huge rant about, he starts going, "Freaks, you're all freaks. I'm a man. I'm the last man." And then someone basically throws a spear into his heart, and he falls down, and the woman runs in and grabs him, and his last words are, "They were afraid of me," which you can't tell if he's sorry or if that's an accomplishment to him, but basically this horrible apocalypse has caused him to see everyone else as monsters and has made him into the monster, the story. So it's very tragic, and the whole sort of church setting sort of adds to this symbolism of him thinking he's the savior, but then getting staked right in front of the altar, and it's some heavy stuff, but it's great. So in conclusion, once again, this is an iconic, fantastic horror movie that I think everyone should see. So, and I think it's public domain at this point, so I would recommend buying a copy and buying a nice copy, but you can probably find this one on the internet too. So please check out this movie, and thank you for watching my video. Hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye.